Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of our International Geraniaceae Group webinars. And this is a particular one because we're going to be looking at various information on pelargoniums and where that information can be found on internet. And I'm super excited to hear more about this topic because finding correct and interesting information about any plant has, until the advent of internet, been extremely difficult. But now that all that information is available to us, potentially very quickly and in large quantities, it's become really difficult to deal with too much information. So having someone like Derek, who's an extremely well-known plantsman and knows an awful lot about succulent plants, including pelargoniums, talk to us a little bit more about this topic is going to be a real treat. So it's a real pleasure to introduce Derek Tribble, who many of you will know for his work on Adromischus and other genera of succulent plants. He currently works with Ernst van Jaarsveld on a book on Gasterias. So that's going to be another book to purchase for our bookshelves, I'm absolutely certain. But without further ado, let's let Derek do his presentation. So over to you, Derek.
Thank you. Well, that's very generous of you. And thanks to you for setting this up, first of all. As you said, I'm more involved with succulent plants than the Geraniaceae. I don't claim any great knowledge of those plants, but I did think that what I've had to do recently for this updated book about Gasterias could be applicable to not just pelargoniums, but researching any genera within the Geraniaceae. Some of the South African sites would obviously just be applicable to pelargonium, but I think there should be something for everybody in the IGG in the talk tonight. Now, a few points before we get started. I'll be actively during the presentation visiting a number of internet sites. The links, the addresses of all of these are set up on a new page within the IGG website. I think you might need to be a member to access them. Perhaps Mattia can clarify that at the end. But there's no need to try and take down notes of all these addresses as we go through the presentation. Now, I remember back in the 1990s thinking, yes, this internet is becoming quite useful now. It's something I probably ought to get a connection to at home. And I could conceive that all new publications would fairly rapidly be made on the internet. But I never thought it would be possible for the vast back catalogue of books and literature in the libraries to be digitized and therefore accessible through the internet. Well, I'm happy to admit that now 20 years on, I'm utterly wrong because from my recent experiences, nearly all of the references I need to find for this Gasteria book are available online. So perhaps there's only something like 3 out of 60 odd critical references that I couldn't find, which I think is pretty impressive. So I thought I'd try and share some of the sites that I've found with you this afternoon. Right, now let me start sharing my screen and we'll go into the beginning with a short presentation. And so you might be a bit puzzled as to why I appear twice on the participants list here. That's because I'm sitting in front of 2 computers. One is my desktop with a big screen, and that's what I'm sharing with you now. but I have a little laptop with a camera on in front of that, and that's what you can see me through. Now, if I get bandwidth problems, I might turn off the webcam, so don't be worried if I disappear, but it does seem to be working quite quickly for me, at least this afternoon. Now, bear with me, I've moved on to the end of the presentation. I didn't want this page. I'll have to just go back through the pages. Now what's happened? Sorry, I'm getting in a mess here. Okay, it should be back to where I wanted it. This is the introductory slide. Although it's lost the bottom of the screen. Let me just try something. Right. We needed a focus for this presentation. So in my greenhouse, Pelargonium incrassatum had just finished flowering when Mattia asked me to do a presentation. So I thought that would make a suitable case study for us to look up on the internet. The photograph here is one I've taken in South Africa. Caption at the bottom there, it was north of Komachus in Namaqualand. Over a decade ago, I've had the good fortune to visit 16 times to South Africa in the past. So I thought, for the purposes of this presentation, I'd try and verify the identity of this photograph. And I don't seriously believe it's anything other than incrassatum, but let's pretend we want to check it out more accurately. Right, now I'll get onto the internet and share a different screen with you. I hope this is going to be the right one. Yes. Okay. I think what most people do to check the identity of a plant is look it up on the internet. So I've typed into a Google search here, Pelargonium incrassatum. And if we click on images, we get, after the annoying adverts, lots of images, which do seem to correspond pretty well with that photograph in habitat that I took, unsurprisingly. Moving on, another very good source to check against, of course, is Mattia's own website. A multitude of pages, in fact, branded under the name of the Pelargonium page. Well, we know incrassatum is in the Horea section, and if I scroll down to his page describing that, and I'm sorry, Mattia, this photo is still stretched on my device anyway. We have a photograph of the plant and the flowers, and that all looks okay. A very useful indication of where its distribution is. That helps us to grow the plants. But at the bottom here, there's a rather strange illustration from an old magazine. That's a bit odd. From Curtis's Botanic Garden, 1804. Now, what's that doing here? We heard in our last presentation to our group from Florent about how little shifts in the arrangement of the petals and stamens, the flowers of these Horea sections, have led to speciation. And I struggle to think that's the same as Pelargonium incrassatum. But if we just go up to the top again, we note that Sims, who was the editor of Curtis's Botanic Garden, isn't the original author. Andra, who is Andrews, was. So we'll investigate that in a few minutes' time. Maybe we can sort this out. Okay, but let's try and find out what the name of this plant means. There's a very useful botanical glossary within Wikipedia. Of course, that's such a useful reference site. So if we jump down to the letter I and scroll through, regrettably, it doesn't tell us what incrassatum means. Okay, it's not that big a glossary, but it often answers my questions, and it's worth knowing about that. Moving on then to somewhere where we can find what the Latin name means. This is Betty Murray's PhD thesis about the Horea pelargoniums, which is available online in multiple places. It's available from the IGG website, but this copy that I've got is off one of the UK university websites. A little bit annoyingly, the page numbering is different compared to the printed version I've got, and annoyingly, the viewer here numbers the pages differently again on the left there. So anyway, I've set it all up so that we come in on the right page for Pelargonium incrassatum. And here we see the normal layout, which I'll come back to, and regrettably in black and white, the wonderful illustration by Elifie Ward-Hillhorst showing Pelargonium incrassatum and the distinctive sets of petals on this species. But from reading in advance, I know at the bottom here, she explains that according to the original publication, 1802, incrassatum refers to the thickened succulent leaves. This is, however, erroneous, as the leaves are neither succulent nor thickened. Well, that's something else that's odd. Why on earth would Andrews have used a Latin descriptive name that's erroneous? So this is starting to ring alarm bells here. We need to dig a bit deeper. So I'll come back to Betty's publication here, well, more than once, but the gold standard for checking identification of any plant, of course, is the original type, the type sample that was named. So let's go and find that for Pelargonium incrassatum. Now, a good place to start searching is IPNI. This is a site, an index, a database of plant names, which Kew still maintains. It was derived from the famous Kew Index, a big set of multiple volumes where all the names of new plants were published decade by decade. So this is the computerized version of that. But it's only as good as the original was. So looking up Pelargonium incrassatum, it gives the place of publication of that name combination. And as we saw from Mattia's website, it was by Sims in 1804 in what became Curtis's Botanical Magazine. Now, this is a massively useful website because it is integrated with one of the libraries, usually. But regrettably, on this particular example, there isn't a link to BHL, the Biodiversity Heritage Library. A lot of them don't have it, but the majority do. It does give us a link to somewhere called Powwow, so let's visit that. Plants of the World Online, another Kew database. And the difference here is whereas IPNI lists all validly published plant names, this one, Plants of the World, gives us the accepted plant names. So this database knows about synonymy of plant names. that it tells us that Pelargonium incrassatum is accepted name here. And scrolling down, images, the distribution map is very poor, but it does give us a whole load of synonyms, which we might come back to later on. Okay, so this hasn't helped me, but I've looked up by other means, just a manual search, where this original publication is. So now we've gone to this wonderful biodiversity heritage library. It's a portal to multiple botanic garden libraries. And it's found a copy of Curtis's Botanic Garden for us. And here in 1804, it was number 761, going the wrong way. We see this odd illustration of a pelargonium, where it's described and named as Pelargonium incrassatum, fleshy-leaved pelargonium. And there's some interesting ancillary information here. So the drawing was made from a nursery in London here, Mr. Colville's nursery in the King's Road, which is all very much built up now, of course, in June 1802, when it was believed to be the only possessor of this plant in the country. But I think that's interesting. Right, okay. Now, although that's the publication of the combination Pelargonium incrassatum, let's go and look at the original publication, which was Geranium incrassatum. Now, this is 1802, so this is where it all starts. And this is in Andrews' serial publication, the Botanist's Repository, where novel plants coming from around the world were illustrated. And let's have a look at the picture. And again, it's not what I expect. It's this puzzling, odd geranium. A bit more background. This was also painted at Colville's nursery in the King's Road in 1802. It forms a very large tuberous root. And it appears to flourish in sandy peat with a small portion of rotting dung. Not quite sure what that would translate to in a more modern compost. Okay, I'm getting worried now. So the original illustration, and I must emphasize that we have this method of binomial naming, where it's not the plants in habitat that are named, and it's not the description on a piece of paper that is named, it's the type, specimen, or where there isn't a herbarium specimen, it's an illustration like this one. So what you're looking at now is the iconotype for Pelargonium incrassatum. And it seems to be a definite problem that it doesn't look like what we're calling incrassatum now. Now, I hope by the end of the talk we can explain this away. But for the time being, I'm going to put that to one side and leave it. And we'll come back to this problem that you won't believe me that the name I picked doesn't seem to check out, but there does seem to be a problem associated with it. But let's carry on with that tour of websites, which is what this presentation was meant to be about. Now, if you don't know about iNaturalist, you should do. It's a wonderful place. It's a citizen science project driven from computers in the US, but partnered all around the world, of course. It's a place where any member of the public can upload photographs of something that's living. Fossils aren't allowed, for instance. And the thing is, there's a community of experts or people who think they're experts who hopefully will notice your photograph and try and name it for you. So this is a wonderful way to get your habitat photographs named. And if I've typed in there Pelargonium incrassatum, and on this view lower down, we get as red dots all the individual observations that people have made, which have become identified as Pelargonium incrassatum. And it's impressively good coverage now after about 15, 20 years of operation of this site. So this gives us a bit more detail on the distribution of incrassatum. Interestingly, there's some down here in the Nersvlakte, which should give me the details. Okay, I thought that was going to give me more of a habitat. Has it logged me out? No. Not to worry. I did want to show you at the top of the distribution here, the very northerlymost observations. I'm getting a very slow response now. This is annoying. It's not. I'm going to refresh this page. This may be a bad move, but let's see if that helps. That's better. Yes, my point was that we can see some of the variation within Pelargonium incrassatum from this site, High Naturalist. So at the most northerly end of the range, what I would call purple flower, cerise, perhaps becomes much pinker. Yes, that shows it better, of course. And if we go back to the map, up in the Rechtersveld, this very most northerly observation, which is not loading. Okay, we can't wait. It's actually got a white flower, but the distinctive arrangement of the petals indicates it's definitely incrassatum. Right, I'm going to move on. Trudy, can you turn off your microphone, please? Now, another website that I'm afraid won't be of much use to most of you is JSTOR. The main site is a library portal, but this is the plants database within JSTOR, which is open to institutions only for membership. So you need to get a login through an institution that you're associated with. It's protected from general public viewing because this contains digital images of the type specimens of a large number of plants now, probably the vast majority of the pelargoniums. However, because there isn't a herbarium specimen which is the type of Pelargonium incrassatum, this isn't much use to us this afternoon at all. But I'm just pointing out that it exists to you. It is giving us some background from the Flora capensis description of the plant. And here it's indicating there's a rather nice painting, which is stored in a herbarium tagged as pre. Now you can probably guess where that herbarium is, but the next website would actually allow us to look it up. So there's another website which is operated by the New York Botanic Garden, where you can type in this acronym abbreviating the name of all the herbariums. And it used to be a big thick book, of course, but now we need quick access on the internet. And at the bottom here, it's telling us that PRI is the herbarium in Pretoria of the South African National Biodiversity Institute, or SANBI, as you probably know it as. So both those websites are useful. Now, there's other ways of accessing herbarium specimens, and we're fortunate that the South Africans have made the catalogue of specimens from the major South African herbaria accessible online. And here it is. It's a bit of a dodgy website in that I find it tends to time out on you. And I'm very scared that this is going to time out on me this afternoon. But so I'm not going to click on it at all. Let's hope it stays put. But I've searched for Pelargonium incrassatum and asked it to display the herbaria specimens in a map format, and we can see them all plotted against a map. The herbarium data is not that wonderful, to be honest. You can see there's a sample here that's got no location data. It obviously isn't native to Cape Town, and it's also obviously not native to the Atlantic Ocean there off the coast. So the coordinates for that one is wrong, as indeed are the coordinates for this herbarium specimen, which is in Bushmanland, but the description says it was found in Skilpad Wildflower Nature Reserve, which is much further to the west. I happen to know, but it's interesting. There's a specimen here that claims to be Pelargonium incrassatum that I think you can read at the top there. Bruce Bayer collected in 1984 near Wuppertal, Eland Kloof Pass. Now, it probably is a Horea section Pelargonium that's been misidentified, and it would be worth checking that out to see what that specimen really is. And it tries to tell us that there's a Pelargonium incrassatum here, but I don't believe that. That's too far south. I think it's been misplotted again. Bitterfontein is further north. But there we go. You can get some useful information out of this site that you can't see anywhere else. Regrettably, these herbarium specimens from South Africa don't come with digitized images, so you can't look at them online. But at least we've got a little bit of information, and you could look them up on a holiday to South Africa or whatever. Right, moving on, there's another website, or another two websites from SANBI that are worth knowing about. Excuse me. It's interesting to know the conservation status of our pelargoniums. And here's the appropriate page for incrassatum. And the good news is it's got the lowest category of least concern. So as we've seen on iNaturalist, it's frequently observed and it's got quite a substantial range. So that's good news. Another nice website that SANBI operate is plantsafrica.com. This is where their staff put up pages with a profile of an individual plant. And here I've searched for Pelargonium incrassatum, but failed to find one. So nobody's actually written it up for Plants Africa yet. But let's look at what it's offering us here. And Pelargonium gibosum, in fact, is at the top of the list. And this is the sort of information you get describing each species. Nice photographs of the plant, information about distribution and habitat and ecology as I scroll down. And there's a lot of pelargoniums being done on this site. This one written by somebody called Roger Oliver. I don't know that guy. So it can be a useful reference for other South African Geraniaceae. Right. now we're going off to look at some geographical databases, GIS systems. And of course, the easiest one to operate is the famous Google Maps. Maybe you're more familiar with Google Earth, which is a standalone application that you can install on whatever device you've got. But the one we're looking at in front of us now is the version that runs on a browser window. So that's far more convenient for this afternoon. So looking at the satellite imagery, well, it's not satellite actually, it's aerial photographs taken from aircraft. We can zoom into Springbok, and I mentioned where I'd taken the photograph was just to the north of the little village of Comacus. And if I zoom in and see the roads, yes, Comacus isn't really up there, it's down here. That's Comacus. You can see the buildings just about. There we go. But it was out of town, up here on this bend. You could park the car there, I remember, and walk up onto the mountains behind. And they're a bit special because there's some quartzite rocks up there, which is always good for succulents. And in fact, I went back to this place in a following year. So it's very useful to be able to look up localities of plants, and Google Maps is a great place to do that. It's got a very good knowledge of place names. So effectively built into this website is a gazetteer of South African names, right down to individual farm names. I have found things that here in Google Maps that aren't in the great big thick book of the gazetteer that I've also got. It's got the more modern place names which aren't haven't been put into the paper publications. So this is good for finding out where your plants came from if you have habitat data. There's more detailed maps available though, and this is where I've got to change the app that we look at and share something different. So let me switch over to another window on my computer. So these are detailed old maps of South Africa, right down to 1 to 50,000. These are freely available on the internet, have been for a number of decades, but they are getting rather out of date now. Most of the surveying work was done 1980s or earlier. But of course they have a level of detail which is very, very useful. The problem is that you need specialist viewing software. What you're looking at is a mosaic of maps all lined up edge to edge so that they fit together and appear to be relatively seamless. If I now zoom in, you can see that bend in the road where I parked the car and would have walked up onto the mountains here in great detail. Okay, now you can also get geological maps, and I think it's going to be this sheet. I've got it loaded, but if I enable that as a different overlay, there we are. You can see that I was walking off the orange onto the brown and up onto this yellow geology, which rather coarsely is tagged as KSG. And you then need, of course, the key to the geological map, and which will tell you these are very ancient quartzites, and there's outcrops of this very good rock for succulents on various hills around about Comacus. That's one way to do it. There's other maps. Let me share another screen now. This is similar. It's the same viewing software, which is freely available off the internet, Diva GIS, although there are alternatives for this, and plugins to browsers to let you look at these map format or georeferenced files, which is what they are. This one we're now looking at is the classification of vegetation in South Africa. There was a landmark publication perhaps 15 years ago now, which came with a digital version of the map that they generated, showing areas with similar vegetation in more detail than had ever been achieved before. It's an impressively thick book. They need a whole page just for the list of authors. It was about 50 contributing authors. So this was a major scientific project undertaken in South Africa. But it doesn't actually add too much to our information about Pelargonium incressatum, which I did look up earlier. It's somewhere on this dark brown patch of vegetation, and we can at least look up, if I get that right. It should pop up a new little window telling me what the vegetation is there, but maybe my computer's running out of memory. I won't pursue that now. But a point I wanted to make is that you can see it's difficult to use these maps individually. What one really needs is a bit of software that puts them all on top of each other, so you can click from one to another and then back again. And fortunately, such a thing does exist. So if I do a share back to our browser, I hope it's this, and it isn't. Bear with me. Right, this is the browser we were using. It's confusing because Zoom renumbers the browsers when you go out of it. But I want to introduce you to this website. Now, this is a bit flaky. Sometimes it's not available, particularly at weekends. But this is the Cape Farm Mapper, and it's well worth getting to know. It's been put together by the South African Western Cape Nature Conservation Department. Excuse me, my throat's going dry. And it looks a bit like Google Maps, in that we can zoom in again. Let's find Springbok. Comagus. Right. But this enables you to overlay various data sets which they have available. If I look at adding another one, you can see there's all sorts of options here. It's aimed at farmers to distribute the information to them. The most useful one, though, are these resource layers, invasive plants, and there's various climate overlays like rainfall that can be added on top. So let's look at rainfall. If I switch on that layer, we get red. Now we need to find the legend to work out what that means. And if our colour match right, that means it's 4 to 8 inches, 100 to 200 millimetres of rainfall a year. Well, that's not too useful, but if you look at month by month, you can find out the seasonality of the rainfall, for instance. So that's interesting. Let's change to say the number of days of frost per year. And on the legend, it tells us this site where I found Pelargonium incressatum should be frost-free. Yes, we're relatively near the coast, but it was 1,000 or so meters up. So that's maybe a bit surprising. But you can also look up geology on this particular website and come on. There it comes. There it goes. Not quite sure what's happening there. Ah. It's not working in a coherent way for me. Maybe this is something to do with Zoom and not having enough bandwidth. So apologies. We are talking to a website in Cape Town. It was working fine for me earlier in the day. But anyway, what I would recommend to you is this Cape Farm Mapper website if you want to look up climatic and similar geographic information. Right, let's plod on. Oh yes, I mean the internet's useful not just for serious stuff. Let's see if there's any good pelargonium jokes on the internet. And maybe the first joke is that Google is just as confused as many other people are about the difference between pelargoniums and geraniums. So it's given me a geranium joke. We'll have to run with that, I think. So to paraphrase, and we've got more annoying adverts here. So, I'm sorry, said the clerk in the flower shop. We don't have potted geraniums. Could you use African violets instead? And the customer replies, no, it was geraniums. My wife told me to water while she was away. Ho, ho, ho. So we know what's happened to the plant. Okay. Right. That's really the end of the different websites I wanted to highlight for you. I hope you find some of those useful. Now let's go back to this rather odd paintings we found of Pelargonium incressatum and explore that further. I'm going to go back to the presentation. And it's resized the screen to window. Bear with me, I've got no control over this while it's this wrong size. That's better. Right. Yes, now let's explore Pelargonium incressatum more deeply. Let's see what other people think of these odd illustrations. Well, our organizer, Richard Clifton, back in the 1990s, produced a useful booklet about these old paintings of Horaeas from the publications of Jacquin, Sweet and Andrews in the early Victorian times. So here we've got what he thought of this odd pink flowered painting. It says, this plate shows a certain lack of care on the part of the artist. The three lower petals should not splay out as shown, and the upper two petals have a knee, which is not shown. all the same, it is easily recognizable as our modern species. So Richard blames the artist. Well, I don't think I can go along with that, because I find that the artists really do just paint what they see. They don't invent stuff. So let's move on then and try somebody else's opinion. Let's see what Professor van der Voort and Vorster wrote about this in the wonderfully beautiful and useful Pelargoniums in Southern Africa series. Here I've highlighted, and I'll paraphrase the text here. Introduced to Kew, 1794 by Masson. Presumably one of those plants eventually found its way to Coville's famous nursery on the King's Road, and it was from a plant there that Andrews prepared his description and illustration of Geranium roseum, right, published in 1801. The epithet roseum is, however, not tenable in the genus Pelargonium because it had already been used by Ehrhart for another species. Then they explain, in 1802, Andrews described it again and illustrated as new a plant of unstated origin from the Coville nursery under the name Geranium incrassatum. This was obviously the same species, and it is incomprehensible that Andrews was unaware of his error. However, the name Pelargonium roseum cannot be used for this species, so Andrews' second name should be applied. So there they give us an explanation as to why we're calling the plant we do call incrassatum by the name of this odd Pelargonium. So there we are, except I wasn't very happy with that. Now, I need to emphasise that it took a number of days for me to realise that there was a problem here. So let's go and research it further and switch back to another application. Got to do a new share. I'm sorry, we're going to go in a loop again, which will go to the wrong browser. Okay, there's a Pelargonium joke. I hope you can see that now. Moving on from here, let's go back to IPNI and look up Pelargonium roseum. And this gives us the place of publication. Yes, I should have put in Geranium roseum, which is what Andrews published. This is telling us that Ayton in Hortus Cuensis actually did publish this combination, Pelargonium roseum, even though it's invalid. There we are, no name illegitimate, in 1812. And over here, oh dear, sorry about those shadows. I do know what to do to get rid of them. If Zoom will only let me. I've lost my Zoom controls here, bear with me. This is a bit annoying. That's probably doing this live rather as a presentation format. I can't, the shadow you see on the right is where I see the miniatures of your webcams. Underneath there's one called BHL, which I'll plan to click because it'll take us on to No, it won't. I can't get it there. Oh, sorry, I know. Right, here we go. So there was a direct link there from IPNI into BHL. And here we have Aiton's publication. So this is, I show the information about this book we're now looking at. It's Hortus Cuensis from 1812. And this is where Aiton published a Pelargonium roseum, P. roseum, citing Andrew's geranium roseum. At the time, he didn't realize it was an invalid name to publish. But I know later on here, it's worth looking down to his number 22 or somewhere nearby. Yes, 26 it is. There he lists Incrassatum. This is significant because it shows that in early part of the 1800s, they really did think these were two different plants. Nobody had put them together at that stage. They were distinct. Let's now look at Andrew's publication of Geranium roseum. And here we go, and the illustration. And yes, now that is what we think of as Incrassatum nowadays. Somehow these have got confused over the centuries up to Van der Volt's publication, The Pelargoniums of Southern Africa. And though that puzzle was the way it stayed for a number of days. And then I had my eureka moment. It was looking at this which suddenly triggered something in my mind. This is not particularly useful in its own right, and it's something I can't find on the internet. The more recent journals are still the subject of copyright, so they're not available for free download. But I had a paper version of Schumania 4, where a study of the DNA of section Horea was published. Now, they only looked at the nuclear DNA, the ITS region, if I remember correctly, and the cladogram you're looking at wasn't their final results. They did various mathematical analysis on the DNA data, but this interim analysis, figure 3 here, shows as sister to Pelargonium incrassatum, a Pelargonium quartziticola. Now this triggered something in my memory. Why are there some very nice pink flowered forms of this beautiful Pelargonium? So maybe that's what's involved here. So let's go and explore that idea. Whoops. And share my screen differently again. Right, it's back to where we were. Let's go into IPNI again, and I hope this is illustrating using these websites I've highlighted this afternoon. So I've now searched for Pelargonium quartziticola, and it tells us where it was published in the year 2000, South African Journal of Botany. Unfortunately, there isn't a direct link to it again, but I know from a Google search that the publishers of the South African Journal of Botany make it available for a free download, but that gives you a zip file. So we'll have to switch to a PDF viewer to actually look at this, which I've got loaded on my computer. Here we go, up to full screen. Right, and here's a different species then, Pelargonium quartziticola. And the initial thoughts were that this doesn't really look that similar. The photos published with it show white-flowered plants, but they do highlight the leaves, which are described as coralliform, a coral-like in other words, and slightly succulent. And to quote from it, the subsucculent leaves in quartziticola are rare in section Horea. Well, that does fit this adjective incrassatum rather better. But they go on to say that it flowers in autumn, which contradicts the Andrews description, where it was flowering in midsummer in England. So it's not the perfect fit. But I wanted to investigate this further because, as I say, I'm sure there were some nice pink-flowered forms of this that I'd seen somewhere. So back through the loop again, I'm afraid, to get to the browser. Here we are. Let's look in iNaturalist again. Now, we haven't got so many observations here, of course. It's a much rarer pelargonium. And one needs to be careful because this is a rare species and iNaturalist automatically obscures the localities. If we dive into one of these, but we do see a rather lovely pink flowering plant. And I think that's a very good match for these old paintings. But here you can see on the right, the green square is the habitat. It's not actually where that green dot is, it's somewhere within the green square. And iNaturalist automatically does this for plants that have a high conservation status. Of course, it's very necessary. Okay. We can also check the flowering time. If I look at the list view of these observations, you can see people only upload their observations when they catch it in flower and leaf. And in South Africa, these are all there in August and September. Oh, the bottom one's in July, that white flowering one. So that backs up the formal description. Okay, well, I think now we've got a resolution on what's happened here. So let me go back to my presentation just to finish off. Okay. So I've put a final 2 slides together as a summary. So I think we saw that in 1802, Andrews published Geranium incrassatum with that as the iconotype. That is the illustration which the Latin name hangs by. It was published as a pelargonium in 1804 by Sims there. But unfortunately, it was redescribed with a superfluous name, quartziticola, in 2000. So really, we should be calling this lovely pink-flowered pelargonium as Pelargonium incrassatum. And the other side of it is that Andrews published Geranium roseum in 1801. Unfortunately, we can't call it Pelargonium rosea. We could call it Aurea rosea. That was a valid name. But there is a name and a substitute name already being put forward for this within the genus Pelargonium by Pearson in 1807, which was Pelargonium condensatum. That Latin means condensed, as you can probably guess, and apparently it's often applied to the compact inflorescence. So the photograph that I started from at the beginning of this presentation ought to be correctly labelled that, Pelargonium condensatum, much to my surprise. Okay, well, this is all very disruptive, of course, and it's disappointing that this hasn't been found before. It'll be awfully difficult to get this corrected. Now, it would be easy to criticise the botanists, but we need to take into account how difficult it was in the past working from these rare books only in a few major libraries. I'm going to quote from Richard Clifton again here, paraphrasing something he wrote, because it highlights the issues. Take it from me, he said, it is very difficult to remember the appearance of these early paintings from one book to another, and from one library to another, and from one week to another, or in my case, from one decade to another. But now, of course, with the internet, we can simply click on different screens, working anywhere where there's a screen and internet connections at any time of our choosing. So this taxonomic work has become so much easier in modern times. And I think I've demonstrated rather well, although I'll admit it's by accident, the importance of checking the original type specimens. And I suggest to the IGG that this needs to be done more thoroughly using modern technology. Now, in this particular case, it's a South African plant, and it'll be up to, I think, the South African botanists to find a way forward to solve this problem that's been uncovered here and decide a way forward. So we'll see what happens in the future. So there we go. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So be prepared to see everyone again. Hello there. And is anybody awake?
Thank you very much, Derek. That was awesome. I really enjoyed your presentation, and it all seemed to work very well. Thank you very much.